Welcome to one of the most disturbing, sort of backwards, out of touch report that I've seen in a long time. This is of course coming from a government institution, the Australian Government Productivity Commission. And they recently released this Harnessing Data and Digital Technology interim report. Now, where other countries are kind of taking a different approach to essentially give back people more rights to their data and essentially give people more control. We see, of course, Denmark giving everybody the right to their own body and facial features. And we see the European Union basically trying to implement, well, not trying to, but having implemented this right to be forgotten and essentially delete all your data. Now, the Productivity Commission is taking a very different approach where we're essentially saying, you know what, maybe we should just let these AI companies get off. Maybe they should be exempt from copyright. Maybe we should pause steps instead of protecting users. Maybe we should instead pause steps to implement mandatory guardrails. This is directly from their report. Do not implement a right to erasure. We're saying we do not want this, which is a pretty crazy thing to say. And the PC is considering whether there is a case for a new fair dealing exception that explicitly allows data mining of institutions or whatever, right? Now, they obviously quote, for example, the European Union, and they say that basically, the European Union has this in place for scientific research and other general use, and general use actually means, we can check this, and general use actually specifically relates to this. It's the EU's rule that basically clarifies that text and data mining can be carried out in relation to facts or data that are not protected by copyright, right? Now, this kind of makes sense, I guess. Sure, we're just going to harvest a population that has no copyright without permission, of course. That's one of the big things here. And this is, of course, coming straight after the Anthropic win, which came before this report. So, it makes sense that they didn't talk about it in the report. But essentially, Anthropic basically won in the US by saying that AI training is fair use. And even though they are basically getting clocked for essentially stealing everyone's books and basically pirating all the books that they were training on, despite saying that they are industry's most safe and ethical choice, they're basically saying from these copyright lawsuits that they could be bankrupted, which is pretty crazy considering they're taking this information. So it's so backwards, right? Because essentially they're saying, okay, if we get sued for taking all this data that we did already take to produce this product, we're essentially going to be bankrupted. And it's just, okay. So we have this kind of going on in the world. This is basically the biggest headline recently, right? And so it's just kind of worrying then that the Productivity Commission is kind of looking at this in like, this is doing a lot of damage, and basically we have AI companies kind of just running free, pontificating without any sort of legal ramifications under this kind of guise of like the future or something. We already have reports. They've already done the research here. We can clearly see this is from their actual report, not the summary. They've said basically there is evidence to suggest that a lot of the stuff that is being trained on has been taken without consent or compensation, which is obvious. I mean, this is obviously the case. This is like the main thing that has been going on for centuries, it feels like now. I found an article, this was literally just 2022, where we were already kind of saying, oh, this is not good. We need to kind of stop this. And so the Productivity Commission is saying maybe, we have some different approaches here. Maybe we should have no policy change. We should just have things as they are, which I guess is kind of fine maybe, but we just need to actually like put more effort into actually tackling these things, but whatever. Policy measures to essentially better facilitate the licensing of copyright materials, which is good. And please, let's just, and then of course the last one, turn things on their head and say, well, maybe we should have exceptions. And this is the one that is really quite worrying. Aren't we kind of all on the same page that essentially stealing people's work for profit, especially when you can't even pay them, and if you were to pay them, you would be getting bankrupt? Shouldn't we be saying that basically this is like one of the worst things to do? This is not what we should be doing. This is really not what we want at all. I don't know. I feel like this should be self-explanatory, but somehow this is not the case. And they are kind of saying that basically, yes, it would help and benefit research institutions and medical technology firms and what have you. But essentially, I feel like they're kind of missing a very important thing that is like this whole right to consent, which is just not being mentioned anywhere. And especially when they say, do not implement a right to erasure, I have to start getting worried. I can't have a government institution talking about this kind of thing and specifically saying, take away people's rights to their own information that we're going to potentially be giving to companies for free, there's all sorts of alarm bells that go off in my head at this. And the part that I think is just super worrying about this is essentially we're saying, oh, we need to conduct more sort of research into what it is that is going on because we don't know enough yet. We don't know enough to essentially put in guardrails for high risk AI. And I mean, like when I look at this, I'm like, what? Under the guise, essentially, the cost would be too high to regulate, maybe iterate on in the future or regulate, the fact that if something changes now and then we realize in, 2 years or, at the rate of things going right now, in a few months, that essentially this is maybe a little bit out of date and we should be changing this, essentially saying that these costs are going to be too high and it's just a redundant thing that we should be doing. But I feel like it's really not a redundant thing and it's really actually important to have mandatory guardrails for high risk AI. I feel like it's in the title, you know what I mean? High risk AI should have mandatory guardrails. You know what I mean? Like we're kind of looking at this in the wrong way. I don't know, it just seems not really a great idea, especially in a country that I feel like has been so historically embedded in occupational health and safety. Like on the approach that essentially things will change in a few years or whatever, I think, yeah, sure, I get that. But you kind of are missing out the fact that, okay, this is in a category where, the whole way in which AI machine learning basically works is that the things that you will train on and things that you will develop and these models that you essentially press play on kind of just function. And once they've kind of been trained and set, they kind of just go. You can look at uncontrolled agents basically already happening. You can look at the AI stop button problem that we've looked at, even maybe 9-10 years ago at this point. These are very important constructs and problems that we were already debating 10 years ago should be kind of set in place before anything happens. And here we are saying basically, essentially, maybe that's not the case. Maybe we should essentially let things run free and then talk about it after maybe the damage has been done or we've properly assessed the gaps. Like, I feel like it's so crazy to hear this because it's just missing such a huge part of this that I just don't understand. You're essentially saying, if there's a high risk AI and maybe it is running free, the fact that it didn't have a stop button on it that is at all times pressable or something along those lines. And obviously, this is a very, very physical, very literal kind of example, but obviously this can apply to all sorts of other fields. I just feel like we're kind of throwing the country under the bus. I also really quickly wanted to talk about the mentality that is present at these companies because I feel like people don't really truly understand. I remember hearing Neil deGrasse Tyson actually talk about this in an interview where he said, we shouldn't be worrying about AI because these companies, they're all engineers. They will make it so that basically if there ever comes to anything, humanity wouldn't get screwed over. And we've kind of already been screwed over. And it is clear that this is very much not the case. But I just wanted to give an insight into what this actually looks like at a company because I experienced something very similar. This guy, came out and he's basically trying to fight for a fair relationship between AI and creators, which is such a mind-numbing thing that this is something we have to campaign for. But essentially, he quit his job at Stability AI because essentially they were not respecting humanity. Which sounds insane to say. I have experienced something very, very similar to this. So I had my degree, it was a master's in computer vision. And on that master's, essentially all the people I would talk to, all the people that I was in groups with and whatever, would talk about projects. And these projects were like corporations that were doing incredibly dark things, even at that time. We're talking about really dark stuff that I don't even really know if I can talk about because maybe, I don't know, back, But essentially, these were collaborations with my university. And I remember being really the only one amongst this whole group that basically said, I don't like this. Maybe this isn't something we should be doing because it's really creepy and absolutely invasive and surely breaks a ton of laws. But they were like, everyone was like, oh, but look at the money. And they all said this. They are all for the money. Trust me when I say this, they are all for the money. They do not care about people's morals. They do not care about a future for humanity. They do not care about making it safe. They just want the money. They're in this for the money. Almost all of them are only in this for the money. And it doesn't matter what they try to say to you. These big corporations, they will always be about the money. They don't care what comes next. They don't care about any of that. They just care about number go up, stuck people happy. That's what matters. So I just want to quickly kind of hone this home, and essentially we can see here, and I'll leave this article. I'll leave all these articles in the description, but essentially I just want to basically show you that these companies are so far from your friend. They just want to make money, and the battle isn't over yet. Remember that the battle isn't over yet. I know that this is very tempting. I am also insanely depressed about this, but just remember that essentially, look, it even says here, in many ways, we are winning. You know, copyright things are stacking up. Unfortunately, Anthropic won against all the book writers in America, but that doesn't mean that they will win everywhere else, of course. So just remember that things can evolve, and we still have a lot of space for that, especially in Australia, where copyright is not allowing these companies to do things. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, let me know what you think. I love how, by the way, this report is written by a guy called Stephen King. Such a, horrific future we're headed towards. The report is written by a guy called Stephen King. I mean, you can't make this shit up. But they do actually allow an opportunity for comment here. We basically can go in and tell them all the different things that we essentially think about this, and maybe they will change things. Maybe they will have more meetings about this in the future. And there's a lot of time before this essentially is done. So before September 1st, you can go and write. I'll leave a link to this in the description. I don't even really know what specifically needs to be changed, because I feel like there's just so much that is kind of missing, and it's such like a backwards, ignoring such like a big elephant in the room. But anyways, it is what it is. I don't know. Let me know anything else in the comments. Send this around to people maybe who don't know that this article exists, and this is kind of the direction that apparently the government is heading in.